By the end of this video, you'll understand why getting your body around other bodies is one of the best things you can do for your brain. But to get there, we have to clarify what we're even talking about. Loneliness is a signal, not an accusation. Just as hunger and thirst are our body's way of telling us we need to eat or drink, loneliness is a natural signal that reminds us when we need to connect with other people. From an evolutionary perspective, being social meant survival. If you stayed in a group, you had food and protection and procreation. All in all, it was a good life, a safe one, and most importantly, a statistically longer one than the loners. This biological imprint stayed with us, driving us to connect even though we can technically survive now without much peopling in modern society. But without the threat of imminent death, loneliness now shows up as shame. Loneliness is often paired with self-blame and self-criticism. I can't find my place among these people, so it must be my fault, or something must be wrong with me. But unless you hate showering, that probably isn't true for you. There's nothing wrong with you, and feeling lonely isn't your fault. It's a call you can choose to answer. Loneliness is unchosen separation. One of the clearest illustrations of loneliness comes from Dr. Rakesh, who wrote the following after a flight delay left him isolated in a hotel room, staring down at all the activity below. I suddenly had a perfect sense of how loneliness feels. I could see the world around me, but I was not part of it. Loneliness is involuntary exclusion from the world you want to be a part of. Being alone is not the same thing as being lonely. Solitude can actually be great for your physical and mental health. It gives you space to connect with yourself. Loneliness creeps up when you want to be included but can't for some reason. Maybe it's distance or values or responsibilities or resources. Sometimes removing that obstacle is all it takes, and other times it's trickier. Loneliness is painful. Literally. The sensory fibers that register emotional and physical pain overlap in the brain. This is the reason why feelings like disappointment, hurt, exhaust us and require time for us to recover. The brain sees them as wounds, and loneliness triggers these same pain points, stirring up fear and loss and sadness, fueling a self-perpetuating cycle where we pull away from precisely the thing we most want. Connection. But is feeling lonely really that bad? In 2009, Dr. Julianne Holt-Lunstad assembled a team to conduct the largest study on the relationship between health and loneliness that had ever been done before. For 12 months, they analyzed 148 studies with over 300,000 individual participants. It was messy, this was new, controversial work, and their findings were about to reframe the entire global health conversation. Here's what they found. Lacking social connection reduced lifespan to the same degree as smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day. Self-identified lonely people lived shorter lives and experienced more health difficulties than obese patients and alcoholics. Loneliness statistically increased the likelihood of coronary heart disease, high blood pressure, stroke, and dementia. And from an economic lens, loneliness adds approximately 8.1% to annual healthcare spending, or somewhere around $360 billion. If your first reaction to this data is that's absolutely insane, you're in good company. We get how feeling lonely can lead to depression and anxiety, but heart disease seems so disconnected, but it's not. And that's precisely the story we're trying to rewrite, that your physical and emotional and mental health all rely on one another. Neuroscientist Dr. Matthew Lieberman calls our brains neural seesaws because they're constantly switching back and forth between social and non-social thinking patterns. Non-social thinking is everything work and task related. It's what we turn on to get things done. Social thinking is the people stuff. Talking, touching, laughing, and loving. What Lieberman found is that our default, regardless of introverted or extroverted tendencies, is the social one. Evolution has placed a bet that the best thing for our brain to do in any spare moment is to get ready to see the world socially. We are built to be social creatures. When this seesaw breaks, when we neglect to satisfy our social needs, the cost is steep. The consequences show up first in how we think, and then in how we feel, and eventually in how long we live. So how do we fix it? The base and the back door. Solitude, paradoxically, protects against loneliness. There's two methods to jumpstart your connected self. These are the fastest and easiest ways to get unlonely in a positive way. The first is solitude, or what I like to call productive aloneness. The following picture helps explain why it's helpful. Researchers classify relationships into 3 dimensions: intimate, relational, and collective. Each dimension expands the number of people included while also shallowing the depth of knowing. For example, you marry one person who is your intimate partner, but you develop several friends who are your relational support. And on a collective level, there are many people who exist in your circles of influence, like coworkers and acquaintances, but who know less about you. Our brains crave to be known at each one of these levels, and at the center of them all is the relationship with ourselves. This self-knowing acts as a base or foundation for every other connection we form. It must be the deepest, and the way we build it is exactly the same as developing any other relationship. We spend time with that person, us. Solitude is aloneness not burdened with shame. It gives us room to understand how and why we think like we do. The better we understand who we are, the more we can bring our true selves to every other relationship in our life. And the second method is volunteering. Service operates like a back door out of loneliness into social revival. One of the reasons loneliness can feel so exhausting is because it puts our brains on high alert. We become hypervigilant, preoccupied with our own emotional safety, and scared of the outside world. The way to short circuit this miswiring is to volunteer. The reason this works so well is that it forces our internal stuckness to turn outward, triggering a neurobiological reward that lowers stress, calms the threat centers in our brain, and pushes feel-good hormones throughout our body. Volunteering is brain therapy. Research also shows that it doesn't matter what type of volunteering you do, and you only need to do about 2 hours per week to rebalance your brain's chemistry. It's kind of insane, but after reading the stat, I'm convinced that every hour you spend volunteering adds an hour to your life. One closing thought before we end. Your best self requires others. Your best ideas, memories, experiences, and opportunities are all grafted into their stories, just as theirs are in yours.